Imagine holding something so small you can't even see it, yet powerful enough to build an entire universe inside you. Something that decides whether you grow, heal, breathe, think, or simply exist. Something that works silently, tirelessly, without applause, without rest. You have never seen it with your own eyes. But without it, not a single second of your life would be possible. That invisible architect is called a cell. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But that's the greatest illusion of life. The most extraordinary things often hide behind the smallest doors. Inside every cell is a world more organized than a city, more efficient than any machine, and more purposeful than any plan humans have ever designed. And the astonishing thing, you are made of trillions of them, each one fighting every moment to keep you alive. A cell isn't just a building block. It's a story of survival. It gathers nutrients, turns them into energy, builds structures, repairs damage, sends messages, and makes decisions in milliseconds. When you fall, it heals you. When you learn, it rewires itself. When life challenges you, it adapts. And if a single cell can endure the unimaginable pressures of nature and still rise, imagine what an entire human made of them can accomplish. Every heartbeat begins with cells firing in perfect rhythm. Every breath begins with cells trading oxygen for life. Every dream, every memory, every act of courage comes from cells working together in silent harmony. They don't complain. They don't quit. They don't wait for motivation. They just do their job, relentlessly, faithfully. So the next time you feel small, remember this. Even the smallest unit of life carries unimaginable power. The same power runs in you. The same resilience, the same intelligence, the same unstoppable drive to grow. You are not made of weakness. You are not made of failure. You are made of cells, nature's most determined creators. And if they refuse to give up, why should you? When we speak of a cell as the fundamental unit of life, we often imagine something sterile, a circle in a diagram, a microscopic dot isolated on a slide. Yet this tiny structure is far more than a biological definition. It is the first boundary between chaos and identity, the earliest whisper of form emerging from formlessness. If you look at the cell not just as a physical entity, but as a psychological metaphor, it becomes a mirror of the human condition itself. The cell is the original declaration of "I exist," and within that declaration lies an entire philosophy of being. Every cell begins by separating itself from what is not itself. That simple membrane, that thin dividing line, is an act of individuation. It says, "This is me, and that is the world outside." Without that boundary, nothing could survive. With it, everything becomes possible. And isn't this the same tension we face within our own inner lives? We define ourselves through the boundaries we choose, what we allow inward, what we express outward, what we protect, and what we let die. The cell reminds us that life begins with differentiation, the courage to stand apart without severing connection. Inside this boundary, an astonishing orchestration unfolds. A cell constantly interprets signals, evaluates threats, pursues nourishment, and maintains equilibrium. It acts with intention, though not consciousness, yet its behavior echoes something deeply human. Jung spoke of psychic energy, libido, as the driving force within the psyche, shaping desires, fears, creativity, and transformation. The cell, too, is animated by a primal energy, a biological libido that propels it toward growth and continuity. It metabolizes what the world gives, transforming raw material into momentum, into life. From the outside, this process seems mechanical. From the inside, it is nothing less than the first spark of vitality. Consider how each cell divides. It does not cling to its own integrity out of fear. It trusts itself enough to become two. Division is not destruction. It is expansion. In our own psychological development, we often resist such division. We fear breaking apart, fear the loss of who we once were. But without this shattering, nothing new is born. Growth demands the willingness to split, to reconfigure, to shed the outdated shape of the self and accept a new form. The cell performs this transformation effortlessly, rhythmically, embodying a principle we spend our entire lives trying to master. Change is not a threat to identity. It is the mechanism of becoming. Even the simplest cell participates in a network larger than itself. It communicates through chemical signals, responding to the needs of its environment and coordinating with its neighbors. It cannot live in total isolation. It thrives through interaction. Psychologically, we mirror this pattern. We are each a single, psychic unit in a vast collective organism. We send emotional signals, absorb the moods of others, evaluate threats, interpret desires, and adjust ourselves in ways we often don't consciously notice. The cell reveals that relationship is not a convenience, it is a necessity. Life is made of interdependence, not independence. Yet not every signal a cell receives is benevolent. Some messages mislead, some threaten its stability, and so the cell must discern, must interpret its world with enough clarity to survive. Here the biology turns philosophical. Survival is not merely about strength, but about perception. A cell that misreads its environment cannot endure. Likewise, a person who misinterprets their inner landscape, who denies fear, suppresses desire, rejects conflict, becomes vulnerable to imbalance. What cells do instinctively, we must learn consciously. To recognize what nourishes, what harms, what calls for action, and what requires release. Within each cell lies DNA, a code older than memory, older even than instinct. It carries the past, shapes the present, and influences the future. If Jung's concept of the collective unconscious has a biological echo, it is here. Our cells carry ancestral wisdom, instructions authored by countless generations that survived before us. The cell is not simply a unit of life, it is a vessel of history, a record of every struggle life has ever endured and overcome. When you look at a cell, you are looking at survival distilled to its purest essence. And yet, for all its resilience, a cell is also vulnerable. It can be damaged, misled, overwhelmed. But its first impulse is always repair. It does everything it can to restore integrity, to heal, to return to balance. In this, the cell teaches us not just about biology, but about the psyche's extraordinary will to heal itself. The human spirit, like the cell, is fundamentally oriented toward restoration. Even in our darkest moments, there is something within us, ancient, instinctive, that fights for equilibrium. To understand the cell is to understand that life is not an accident. It is a determined expression of resilience. You are made of these units, not fragile, but fiercely adaptive. Intelligent in a way deeper than thought, persistent in a way stronger than intention. Every one of your trillions of cells wakes each day to the same mission: continue. Expand, transform. If you ever doubt your capacity to change, and to heal, to endure, remember this. The blueprint of your strength has existed since the first cell formed in the ancient oceans. You are built from victory, from adaptation, from life refusing to yield. Act like it. If the cell is the first declaration of "I exist," then its structure and function are the unfolding of that existence into form and purpose. A cell does not simply occupy space. It shapes itself, and through its actions, shapes the organism it belongs to. At this level, biology and psychology begin to mirror each other with uncanny precision. Structure is never passive. Function is never accidental. And the interplay between the two creates a rhythm that appears not only in living tissues, but in the architecture of our inner lives. Every structure of the cell exists because it fulfills a need, a drive, what Jung might have called an archetypal impulse toward wholeness. The membrane protects, the mitochondria generate energy, the nucleus holds the deepest code of identity, and the cytoskeleton gives form and direction. Nothing is extraneous. Nothing exists without participating in the larger intention of survival and expression. In this way, the cell is not merely a biological unit. It is a microcosm of psychic organization. The outer structure reflects an inner truth, that life must organize itself around purpose or risk, dissolving back into chaos. Just as the cell's boundary makes individuation possible, its internal structures represent the psychological functions we rely on to navigate our own lives. We have parts that defend us, parts that generate vitality, parts that store memory, and parts that transform raw experience into meaning. These components do not always agree, but they coexist in a delicate balance, just as within the cell. The cell's harmony is not static. It is constantly renegotiated, constantly corrected, constantly maintained through a dynamic process that echoes the inner work each person must undertake to remain whole. Then there is function, the cell's ability to perform tasks, respond to stimuli, and contribute to something beyond itself. A muscle cell contracts, a neuron fires, an immune cell hunts. Function gives structure its purpose, just as our behaviors give meaning to our internal architecture. The psyche, too, must act. It must express, assert, protect, create, and relate. Without expression, structure becomes stagnation. Without structure, expression becomes chaos. The cell holds these forces in tension, revealing that stability does not arise from rigidity but from a fluid cooperation between form and action. In psychological terms, one could understand this interplay through the concept of libido, the fundamental energy that drives behavior. Creativity, connection, and transformation. Libido is not merely sexual. It is the raw psychological force that fuels life. Inside the cell, we see a biological reflection of this principle. Mitochondria convert nutrients into energy with relentless precision, generating the power that allows the cell to perform its function. This conversion is the biological equivalent of psychic alchemy, transforming what you take in, experiences, relationships, conflicts, into the fuel that shapes your identity and your direction. When the cell performs its function well, the organism thrives. When it falters, the whole system feels the imbalance. The same is true of the human psyche. If a person suppresses their natural function, whether creativity, leadership, nurturing, exploration, or reflection, their life contracts. Symptoms appear: anxiety, lethargy, dissatisfaction, confusion. The cell reminds us that life is healthiest when each part of the self is allowed, even encouraged, to express its nature. Suppression leads to dysfunction. Expression leads to integration. There is a remarkable philosophical lesson in how cells specialize. Each one begins as a blank potential, capable of becoming anything. But potential alone is not life. Potential must crystallize into a path. A stem cell becomes a neuron, a muscle fiber, a blood cell. Not because one destiny is superior to another, but because differentiation gives life direction. The cell gives up infinite possibilities to embody a single truth. This mirrors the psychological journey of every individual. At some point, you must choose your function, not as a limitation, but as a commitment to becoming something real. Meaning arises not from being everything, but from becoming one thing deeply and authentically. Even in their specialization, cells remain interconnected. A neuron cannot survive without the support of glial cells. A muscle cell is helpless without nerve impulses. Immune cells rely on chemical messages to know when to act. This interdependence exposes a profound reality. No function exists in isolation. Your purpose, no matter how personal, gains strength only when it contributes to a larger system. Your relationships, your community, your culture, your future. Independence is a myth. Interdependence is the truth of life. Cells also embody a paradox that resonates deeply with human experience. Even as they commit to their function, they must constantly renew themselves. Proteins degrade and are rebuilt. Structures wear down and are repaired. Nothing within the cell is permanent, yet its identity remains intact. This is the psychological equivalent of growth. You change every day, letting go of outdated patterns, integrating new lessons, adapting to new contexts. Yet the core of who you are persists. Renewal is not a threat to identity. It is its maintenance. And perhaps most striking is the cell's unwavering devotion to harmony. When a cell senses that its function no longer serves the whole, when it becomes damaged beyond repair or begins to threaten the organism, it initiates a process of self-destruction. Not as an act of defeat, but as an act of integrity. It understands something we often resist, that sometimes letting go is the highest expression of purpose. In psychological terms, this is the dissolution of outdated parts of the psyche, patterns, attachments, beliefs, that no longer serve the path of growth. So the cell teaches us that structure without purpose collapses, and purpose without structure dissolves. The two must dance together, constantly, endlessly, creating the rhythm of life itself. Remember this: your structure shapes your purpose, and your purpose reshapes your structure. Change either one, and your entire life begins to transform. ChatGPT said, "There is a strange irony at the heart of the cell. The simpler it appears, the more complex it becomes the moment you truly look at it. What seems like a tiny, featureless bubble under a microscope is, in reality, a vast and intricate landscape, an inner cosmos governed by rules, tensions, desires, and drives that echo the symbolic architecture of the human psyche. We overlook cells because they are small, but size has never been an indicator of depth. The unconscious proves this every day. The smallest, quietest impulses often shape our lives more profoundly than the loudest decisions. A cell looks simple only because we are not trained to see its layers. Much like the human personality, it hides complexity beneath a veneer of simplicity. On the surface, it is a membrane and some fluid. But inside, it is a storm of interactions. Signals clashing, molecules dancing, structures dissolving and rebuilding in a ceaseless cycle of transformation. It is a world that holds itself together even as it constantly falls apart. And this paradox is the essence of psychological life as well. If you examine the cell closely, you find that its apparent simplicity is a mask, not a deception, but a container. The membrane creates a boundary, but it also creates mystery. Everything inside it works with a kind of silent intelligence, a pattern of behavior that suggests purpose without consciousness. This concealed complexity resembles the unconscious mind, where ancient instincts, repressed emotions, and symbolic drives operate beneath the surface of what we show to the world. We think we are simple until we sit alone with our thoughts. The cell is no different. Complexity is its hidden truth. Even the way the cell handles energy reveals this dual existence. At first glance, energy production looks mechanical, automatic. But inside the mitochondria, the process is astonishingly nuanced. A cascade of reactions that relies on timing, gradients, polarity, and exchange. This is the biology of libido in its purest form. Raw potential transformed into the force that sustains life. Jung understood libido not merely as sexual energy, but as the fundamental current that animates the psyche. Desire, creativity, will, aggression, tenderness, longing. The cell mirrors this perfectly. The transformation of energy is simple in theory, endlessly intricate in execution. The cell must constantly balance opposing forces: stability and flexibility, openness and protection, expansion and restraint. These opposites do not cancel each other out. They create the tension that allows the cell to function. Every psychological system depends on the same tension. Too much rigidity and identity becomes brittle. Too much openness and boundaries dissolve. Too much desire without structure leads to chaos. Too much structure without desire leads to stagnation. The cell demonstrates that complexity is not the enemy of simplicity. It is its engine. We often imagine complexity as something chaotic, but the cell's intricacy is organized, patterned, rhythmic. It is complexity with intention. The nucleus stores information, but not passively. It constantly evaluates, edits, activates, silences. DNA is not just a code. It is a living archive responding to experience. This responsiveness parallels the human capacity for psychological adaptation. Every experience we undergo rewrites us, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Trauma leaves marks, curiosity rewires connections, relationships reshape emotional circuitry. We are never static. Neither is the cell. And there is a deeper truth hidden inside this microcosm. Every cell contains far more potential than it expresses. In a single human cell, the blueprint for the entire organism is present. Liver cells carry the instructions to become neurons. Skin cells contain the plan to form muscle, but they do not activate that potential because their role requires focus. This raises a profound psychological insight. Human beings also carry immense unexplored potential, latent abilities, unexpressed creativity, dormant desires, forgotten instincts. Not all of them can be expressed at once. To live is to choose what to activate and what to let rest. But knowing that the potential exists can be transformative in itself. The complexity hidden in simplicity also becomes evident when a cell communicates. One signal might trigger growth, another might halt it. One molecule whispers safety, another warns of danger. These signals appear simple, yet they initiate cascades of reactions, entire pathways ignited by a single trigger. This is exactly how the psyche operates. A single word, a single memory, a single moment of intimacy or rejection can unleash a flood of emotions, a reshaping of beliefs, a reorientation of desires. The catalyst is small. The effect is immense. Complexity hiding in simplicity. Even the cell's sexual and reproductive processes reflect this principle. When cells divide, merge, or exchange genetic material, the mechanisms appear straightforward at first glance. Fusion, replication, separation. But the biochemical choreography is astonishingly complex, a dance of precision and timing. Psychologically, sexual energy functions the same way. On the surface, it is a biological impulse. Beneath the surface, it is a force capable of reshaping identity, relationships, creativity, and meaning. Sexuality is simple in form, yet complex in impact, mirroring the cell's hidden depth with uncanny fidelity. The true secret, however, lies in how the cell navigates uncertainty. It makes decisions, whether to grow, divide, repair, or self-destruct, based on cues that are often ambiguous. It calculates risk. It interprets signals. It acts without absolute clarity. Human beings do the same. Life offers no certainty, only signals that must be interpreted with imperfect understanding. The complexity within us is not a flaw. It is a necessity, the mechanism that allows us to respond with nuance rather than automatism. The cell's simplicity is only the doorway. Its complexity is the reality. And this should remind us of something essential. You are never as simple as you appear to others, or even to yourself. You are a universe contained within a boundary, a being of untold depth and constant transformation. If there is one aspect of the cell that most clearly mirrors the human psyche, it is its relentless communication, its unending dialogue with everything around it. No cell lives in isolation. Even when floating alone, it is listening, sensing, interpreting, and responding. Life itself is a kind of conversation, and the cell is its most ancient speaker. What we often imagine as a quiet, self-contained unit is, in truth, a participant in an immense, invisible network of exchanges. Messages flow in every direction. Chemical whispers, molecular invitations, warnings, permissions, seductions, refusals. It is an ecosystem of signals, and every signal has meaning. When you examine this process closely, it becomes clear that communication is not optional. It is survival. A cell survives not because it is strong, but because it is receptive. It senses threats before they strike, nutrients before starvation, and opportunities before collapse. This receptivity has a psychological parallel, the ability to perceive the world accurately, to read the emotional and symbolic signals within relationships, and to understand what one's inner life is trying to express. Jung emphasized that the psyche is constantly sending messages from the unconscious to the conscious mind. Dreams, bodily sensations, impulses, anxieties, desires. Like the cell, we are always receiving signals, even when we believe ourselves to be silent. Inside the organism, cells speak to one another through complex chemical languages, each signal triggering a cascade of responses. A single molecule released by one cell may travel across tissues to activate another cell far away. Sometimes the message is an invitation: grow, divide, heal. Sometimes it is a boundary: stop, withdraw, conserve energy. Sometimes it is a warning: danger approaches. This dynamic is remarkably similar to human relationships. One person's tone, expression, or touch can alter the emotional state of another. A lover's warmth can soften rigid defenses. A harsh word can shut down entire avenues of expression. Communication is never neutral. It shapes the psychological landscape with every exchange. There is also a sensual dimension to cellular communication, a kind of biological intimacy. Cells recognize one another through receptors that fit together like a lock and key. When the right signal binds to the right receptor, something opens. Something changes. Something awakens. This interaction is not unlike the human experience of erotic and emotional contact. Sexuality At its core is communication, an exchange of signals, vulnerabilities, and energies that reshape the participants. At the cellular level, this exchange is literal. At the psychological level, it is symbolic, but equally transformational. The cell must constantly interpret the signals it receives. Not every message is true. Not every invitation is safe. Not every warning is accurate. The organism depends on the cell's ability to discriminate, to discern what is real from what is noise. This mirrors the inner psychological process of making sense of conflicting desires, impulses, and fears. A person who misreads their inner signals becomes lost. A cell that misreads them becomes diseased. Accuracy of perception, both biological and psychological, is not a luxury. It is the foundation of well-being. There is another remarkable aspect of cellular communication. Cooperation arises from conflict. Cells do not always agree with the signals they receive. Sometimes one pathway demands growth, while another demands restraint. The cell must negotiate these contradictions, holding tension between opposing forces until a resolution emerges. Jung believed that the psyche evolves through this same tension of opposites. The conscious and unconscious, instinct and morality, desire and duty, each pulls in its own direction. The goal is not to eliminate conflict, but to integrate it. Harmony is born from dialogue, not domination. This becomes even more profound when we consider the organism as a whole. Trillions of cells communicate in ways that create a singular experience, your experience. If one cell senses danger, the entire organism prepares to act. If one cell perceives nourishment, the organism moves toward it. This distributed intelligence suggests that consciousness itself may be the culmination of countless microscopic exchanges. Your sense of self, your identity, emotions, thoughts, may emerge from a chorus of cellular voices speaking in unison. Unity built from multiplicity, identity built from communication. Even the immune system is a network of conversations. Immune cells communicate constantly about what belongs and what does not. They negotiate boundaries, identify threats, and orchestrate defense. This mirrors the psychological process of defining the self. We are constantly deciding what to internalize, values, beliefs, desires, and what to reject. A healthy psyche, like a healthy immune system, knows how to protect itself without isolating itself. Too much openness leads to overwhelm. Too much defensiveness leads to rigidity. The balance is delicate but essential, and when communication breaks down, the consequences are profound. A cell that stops responding to signals may become cancerous, pursuing its own agenda at the expense of the whole. Psychologically, this is akin to a fragmented part of the psyche overriding the rest, an obsession, a trauma, an addiction, or an unchecked desire taking control. The cell teaches us that ignoring communication, internally or externally, leads to disorder. Listening restores harmony. Perhaps the deepest lesson is that no signal is meaningless. Everything the cell encounters has the potential to shape its destiny. Likewise, every experience, relationship, conflict, or touch leaves an imprint on the psyche. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is without significance. Life is built through exchanges, some delicate, some overwhelming, some transformative. If the cell survives by staying in conversation, then so do we. We cannot evolve in silence. We must listen to our inner signals with honesty and to the world around us with clarity. Communication, biological, emotional, psychological, is the mechanism through which life expresses its deepest intelligence. And if you wish to grow, you must learn to hear what is speaking within you and around you. If there is a final truth the cell offers us, it is resilience, an ancient, instinctive, almost mythic will to continue. Every cell carries within it the memory of survival, stretching back billions of years. This memory is not intellectual, but embedded in the very architecture of its being. It has endured cosmic radiation, shifting atmospheres, violent chemical worlds, predatory threats, and evolutionary pressure. And despite all of that, it persists, adapting, reinventing, refining itself. This resilience is not merely biological, it is symbolic. It mirrors the human capacity to withstand psychological storms, to regenerate after emotional devastation, and to find meaning even in the darkest corners of the unconscious. When you study a single cell's behavior under stress, you witness a profound lesson about endurance. Cells detect damage and instantly activate repair pathways. They pause growth, conserve energy, and marshal resources with remarkable precision. They do not panic. They do not despair. They respond. The cell teaches us that suffering is not a signal to collapse. It is an invitation to reorganize the self. Jung understood this deeply. The psyche's wounds are not final defeats, but openings, cracks through which new understanding can emerge. Even more striking is the cell's ability to transform adversity into strength. When exposed to mild stress, cells become more resilient, more adaptable. They refine their internal systems and sharpen their responsiveness. This echoes the psychological process of individuation. Struggle forces us inward, compelling us to meet parts of ourselves we would otherwise ignore. Desire, fear, anger, longing. These are not weaknesses, but energies waiting for integration. The cell engages with its own struggles directly. It does not suppress, rationalize, or avoid. It adapts. And through adaptation, it becomes more whole. There is also a sensual dimension to this resilience, a kind of erotic charge rooted in the impulse to continue, to express, to become. The same libido that drives cellular growth and regeneration fuels human creativity, sexuality, and transformation. This energy is not polite. It is primal and insistent. It does not negotiate with despair. It pushes forward, seeking connection, expression, and renewal. Resilience is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the erotic force of life, asserting itself through vulnerability. Each cell carries this force, and so do we. Yet resilience is not only about survival, it is about coherence. When the body is injured, cells mobilize with exquisite coordination, communicating through chemical signals to rebuild what was lost. They do not ask whether the damage was deserved. They do not assign blame. They simply heal. In psychological life, we often resist this kind of healing because we are entangled in narratives. Who hurt us, why it happened, what it means. The cell reminds us that the instinct to restore balance exists beneath the story. Healing is not an intellectual decision. It is a biological imperative. And still, resilience has its limits. When a cell perceives that it can no longer contribute to the organism, when damage is beyond repair, it initiates self-destruction, not out of weakness, but out of profound integrity. It chooses the whole over the self. This act is not tragic but wise. In psychological terms, this mirrors the process of letting old versions of ourselves die. Patterns, identities, defenses, some of them carried us through unbearable periods. But when they begin to harm our future, the psyche must release them. The cell shows us that transformation often requires sacrifice, the willingness to shed what once defined us to make space for what must come next. There is a philosophical elegance in the way cells navigate time. They live in cycles: growth, maintenance, repair, renewal. Nothing in a cell remains static. Everything is in motion, everything is temporary, yet the organism remains identifiable and whole. This reflects the human journey with uncanny symmetry. We are constantly becoming. The emotions you felt 5 years ago have dissolved. The desires that drove you last month have changed. You are different today than yesterday, yet unmistakably you. The cell reveals that identity is not a fixed state, but a continual reassembly of the self. This resilience also expresses itself through connection. No cell survives alone. Its strength depends on the network around it, the neighboring cells, the signals exchanged, the tissues that support its function. Humans, too, are not built for isolation. Our resilience is amplified through relationship, intimacy, emotional exchange. This is not weakness. It is biological law. To be connected is to be strengthened. To be isolated is to be diminished. There is a reason emotional wounds cut so deeply. Our biology and psychology evolved to be communal. Strength arises not from standing alone, but from being integrated into a greater whole. Perhaps the deepest revelation is that every cell operates with a profound trust in life. It trusts its environment enough to communicate. It trusts its internal machinery enough to adapt. It trusts the organism enough to serve its role. And when necessary, it trusts the process of ending. Human beings struggle with trust. We fear uncertainty, resist change, doubt our own instincts. But the cell shows us that trust is not naive. It is fundamental to survival. Trust is the silent agreement between life and possibility. So when you look at a cell, you are not just observing biology, you are witnessing the echo of your own potential. The same resilience that allows cells to heal, adapt, and create is alive in you at every moment. Never forget, you were built from survival. Shaped by adaptation and carried forward by a force older than memory, honor that.